What's up, everybody? I'm Jason Alt from Brainstorm Brewery. I'm joined by friend of the cast, Joey DeRochers, a.k.a. Joey D, a.k.a. Death and Stuff on Twitter, a.k.a. Moles4.
Hey, how's it going, Jason?
Good to have you with me, Joey. We are... No, that sucks. Good to have you with me, Joey. It's good to hang out. We are quarantined. We can't hang out and play some EDH in real life, but you were interested in using some of this downtime to make a new deck, and I figured I could help you out with that.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to secure a copy of Reaper King from the secret lair they recently dropped. Well, I guess it's not super recent anymore, but for me, it's recent, I guess.
I said this week
And
that Conspiracy was recent, so you're fine.
and it's actually funny because I used to have a roommate who got me into EDH, and the only deck I would ever borrow of his was Reaper King. So it's technically the first EDH deck I've ever had. Um, and he moved away, so I no longer have access to it. So I guess it's time for me to make my own.
All right, now, when you said you wanted to play Reaper King, you told me a few things you didn't want to do with that deck.
Yeah, so it's kind of difficult if you do a few things. Like if you play Changeling Tribal and they remove your Reaper King, you're really just playing mediocre creatures that have lost their synergy, kind of. You know what I mean? So I was hoping we could find a new way to build a Reaper King deck. I also did not want to make a Blink deck because I had made a Blink deck with, I believe, Rune,
Mm-hmm.
and I just really didn't like the play style, and it felt like you just sit around doing nothing until you try and combo win. I don't know. It was an odd deck, and I really didn't enjoy its play style. So I'd like to make a Reaper King deck, but a little less traditional of a build, I guess.
Now, Rune is a pretty grindy Blink deck, whereas Reaper King, if everything goes right, you're going to be casting something like Eerie Procession or Ghostway, and just getting all your stuff at once, having a bunch of triggers, and being pretty explosive. You're also going to have those turns where you just Conjurer's Closet, a Changeling or a Scarecrow. But if you don't have your commander, you're blinking a Scarecrow or a Pilly Palace. So
Yeah.
it's not always great. Now, what I wanted to do was use the fact that we have access to all 5 colors to make a deck that would perform fine without your commander, but would be very good with your commander and maybe a little bit of help. So the first thing I do when I build a deck is I go to EDHRec.com, as you see on my screen, and let's just type Reaper King into EDHRec, and it's going to take us to Reaper King's page. Now you're going to get a general idea of what the average deck is. EDHRec scrapes all the sites like Archidekt and deck stats, where people submit their deck lists, and it kind of gets an average. Like, a lot of people are playing Grand Architect, Path of Ancestry, Conspiracy. Those are recently reprinted cards that you might have access to. And here's some really high synergy cards. So like we said, Eerie Interlude is in something like 60% of all the Reaper King decks, just because people love that Blink stuff. Rider Replication is in just about half. People are playing Unsettled Mariner. Taurian Mauler, it's a great creature that grows. So it kind of seems like if you look at the cards that a lot of people are playing, there's a lot of Blink stuff like Eerie Interlude. There's a lot of explosive combo stuff like you play Rite of Replication targeting your Reaper King, and 5 copies come into play and they all see each other. So you're going to get something like 30 triggers. You have Spark Double just for value, and you have Arcane Adaptation, which can make any creature in your deck into a Scarecrow, whether it's in your hand or what have you. Then you have stuff like Yarok, which will double your triggers. So whenever you play a Scarecrow, if you have Reaper King out, you're going to get 2 triggers. And then just general good stuff like Joara. So, Joara? Jehoira? I don't know, man.
Joyra?
Weatherlight Captain. J-Dog. We'll call her
Oh,
J-Dog.
J-Dog. Sounds good.
So, that's just a general good stuff card. Now, if you look here at top cards, this is, the stuff that's very, very high synergy and very high inclusion. Now, a high synergy score means that the card is basically just played in Reaper King. you know, you're going to have like a negative synergy score for Soul Ring because every deck has Soul Ring.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to have a very high synergy score for Scuttlemutt because nobody but Reaper King players are playing Scuttlemutt because it's just a really bad Darksteel Ingot. So if you look at these cards, these are the cards that are in a lot of Reaper King decks and only in Reaper King decks for the most part. So you got Scare Teller and Heap Doll and junk like that. Now we get into the mediocre creatures that are just sort of in the deck, and here's the instance that people are playing in. This is the kind of stuff that is in the deck you don't want to play, you know?
Yeah.
You're not going to be running Imposter of the Sixth Pride or Grim Poppet necessarily, right? Some of those cards are fine. Adaptive Automaton, that's fine, right? You know, that's not a bad card. Foundry Inspector, Metallic Mimic, especially if you're going some sort of tribal thing. But for the most part, we want to kind of narrow down and find some different ways people are building the deck. So if you go all the way back up to the top of the page, you have themes here. These are the different ways that people are building. There's Scarecrow Tribal, Artifacts, Shapeshifter, Blink, Clones, Land Destruction, Gigantha Companion, Planeswalkers. I'm just reading this like I'm giving a bad PowerPoint slide presentation. I apologize for that.
Pretty much.
But if you wanted to avoid Scarecrow Tribal and Shapeshifter Tribal, if you clicked on Blink or Artifacts, you're going to start getting some ideas for some cards that are maybe played so little in the general deck that signal is getting blocked out by a lot of noise. You're not going to see these good Artifact synergy cards because it's blocked out by everyone's playing Blade of the Sixth Pride. So to get some more ideas, I'm going to click on the Artifact theme, and it's going to refresh the page and give us a whole new page of cards. Now all of a sudden, you're seeing Padim in a lot more of these decks. You know, the number of decks is lower because it's 307 people building decks that are flagged as, you know, heavy Artifact. So now you're starting to see stuff like Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, which isn't great in a general deck, but if you're playing a heavy Artifact theme, that's much better. Paradoxical Outcome, if you wanted to play a bunch of artifacts, pick them up and replay them, that's your the kind of card you want to be playing. So you're still getting a lot of the scarecrows here. But I got a feeling that if we go into some of the enchantments and maybe the artifacts, the utility artifacts, we're going to see some different stuff that'll give us some better ideas. So if you look, we're seeing Ghostway, Ephemerate, you know, Kindred Summons. We're seeing a lot of the kind of stuff that's in a lot of the decks where it's just, okay, we're just we're not a blink deck per se, but we are a deck that benefits from Ghostway by virtue of our commander triggering a bunch. But you start to look at some of this stuff like Scrap Mastery, Open the Vaults, and Kindred Charge. And these are pretty interesting cards that you wouldn't run in a typical build. Now, I'm seeing cards here in the utility artifacts that are very interesting to me. The ones that interest me are cards like Minion Reflector, Helm of the Host, Blade of Selves, Ashnod's Altar, maybe Semblance Anvil. I'm starting to get some ideas. So my idea for this deck would be a token build. Your 5-color tokens, which gives you access to anything you want. You could have access to Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, Anointed Procession, Assemble the Legion. You're going to get a bunch of tokens. Now, you'll have to do some work to make those tokens into scarecrows. But that's where some of the cards that the deck's already running come in. If you ran something like Arcane Adaptation, whenever you got a trigger for like Assemble the Legion, and you put 4 soldiers into play, Arcane Adaptation would see them all as scarecrows, and you would get 4 triggers off Reaper King. The benefit to playing something like this is if you don't play Reaper King, you just made 4 soldiers, which is, you know, kind of fine for something to happen for 0 mana on your upkeep. So instead of saying, oh, my deck sucks, I'm playing terrible scarecrows when I don't have my commander, this deck says, when I don't have my commander, and don't have my commander plus Arcane Adaptation or Conspiracy, I'm still a very decent token deck that can get work done, and I'm not worrying about the triggers, but when I do get the triggers, it's going to be very explosive. Your ability to make like 7 tokens for 8 mana or something like that is something that happens in other colors. You're not going to get a spell that says pay 7 mana, get 6 scarecrows. So if you don't care what kind of creature you're making tokens of, you can make tokens fairly easily. So that's the kind of thing I wanted to lean into. Now, when I build a deck, I use a program called Archidekt. Just archidekt.com. It's spelled weird. It's Archidekt, I guess, with a K. But if you do a little bit of work to find that website based on its weird spelling, it is my favorite website to type decks into. And one feature that I really like, what I'm using now, is called the Sandbox. So you can either click on this icon to add cards from search, or you can do a text input. So if you have a list of the cards somewhere else, you can just paste them into this, and then you can see them displayed on the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a few questions, and we're going to start kind of looking at some of the creatures we should put in the deck, and then we're going to paste them into Archidekt, bring them up on the screen, and just kind of have a look at how our creatures look. So how do you feel about 2-card combos that do not rely on your commander?
I feel good about them. I mean, it's always good to have win conditions that are outside the primary goal of the deck, I guess. But I wouldn't want a ton of them. But yeah, that interests me.
Now, when I run combos like that, I don't like either combo piece to be worthless.
Okay.
So when I have a deck and I'm running, say I'm running Kiki Jiki, a lot of people are just like, oh, I'll run Pestermite. But I don't run Pestermite. I will run Zealous Conscripts, because if you draw Zealous Conscripts and you need to win the game, Conscripts can steal a blocker, turn it into attacker, and all of a sudden, you're doing stuff, versus Pestermite's just sort of, I tapped it, dude. I did it.
Yeah.
So in that context, I think Zealous Conscripts is a much better creature on its own. So I like to run 2-card combos where one of the cards isn't just, oh, this is a combo piece. It's actually a magic card that does magic card stuff. So when I like to run 2-card combos, I look at stuff I would run anyway, and I think you would run Pilipala anyway, for example. And if you're going to run Pilipala, you should run Grand Architect, because I can generate infinite colorless mana. So you look at some other stuff like Godo Bandit Warlord plus Helm of the Host is a good combo, because you can just, swing infinitely. It's a cheesy way to win the game, but it's easy to interact with, I think, and it's easy to disrupt. And I think you would run Helm of the Host anyway, and I think it costs you very little to run Godo Bandit Warlord. Helm of the Host is very, very, very good in this deck. So instead of running something like Fabricate, I like Godo Bandit Warlord being a combo piece, but also just a way to tutor up the Helm of the Host if you can't slap it on Godo and swing. I think slapping Helm of the Host on your Reaper King and having a Reaper King token that triggers extra when you play a Scarecrow is going to be very good. So I included a couple 2-card combos in your creatures, and then I focused on ways to get you either cards or tokens. So you have stuff like Sharding Sphinx, Locust God, Xyrus the Writhing Storm, a new card from Commander 2020. Monastery Mentor, Hangerback Walker, stuff like that. You're going to have ways to dump your colorless mana that if you happen to get the Grand Architect Pilipala combo. So you got stuff like Walking Ballista, again, Hangerback Walker. And there's some stuff that you will always want to run in a token deck. I think you'll always want to run Champion of Lambholt, because if you're making a lot of tokens, that can get huge, and then all of a sudden they can't block your creatures at all, which is, it's very good. So I put together a list of the creatures that I would run, and you just paste them here. The one thing that's a pain about this input is it won't find it if it's a split card and you don't write name of the card on the front / name of the card on the back. But
yeah,
you can, if you want to do that, you just paste everything else, and when it says it doesn't find it, you just go to the see, it says all cards have been found here. You would just go to add over here on the left, and you would type in the name of the card, and it would bring it up. So for like, what's the name of a split card? Delver of Secrets.
Explosion.
So you just type in Delver of Secret. You type in DELV, and it brings it up. So I could add that to the deck manually that way. So it's filed a few of our creatures as enchantments. Perforos, God of the Forge, which you absolutely want in a token deck because you're going to get triggers every time you, generate some tokens. So you're a deck that like, okay, I made a bunch of tokens, but they're not scarecrows, so I didn't do anything. But if you have Perforos and Impact Tremors, you're just doing token deck stuff. I think you want to run Dryad of the Elysian Grove. You're playing extra lands, but you're also a 5-color deck, so this helps you out immensely. That's a brand new card that does a lot of work in the deck. So again, I mentioned that I have some general token stuff like Avenger Zendikar. You got Brutaclad to if you have a Reaper King token that's not legendary, you can make every creature token into a Reaper King. Play one Pelly Pal and blow up like 30 things. That's a lot of fun. So there's a few of the 2-card combos, but this is just basically, we're playing Psy Master Thopterist in the deck, and we're gonna get some artifacts, and we're gonna draw some cards. So we have a few. We have Scarecrow, Pelipala. We have a few scarecrows and shapeshifters, but not a ton. You said you wanted to run Unsettled Mariner because it's just, it's fine. It makes a small frost wall in your creatures, and also it's a shapeshifter. I think we have room in the deck to run cards that you want to run in that strategy. Now, as far as instants go, there are a few ways to generate some tokens, but I think for the most part, you're going to want to be a little bit more protective of your commander and your copy of Arcane Adaptation or Conspiracy or Xenocraft or whatever you're doing. So we're going to run that full complement, every card that makes creatures into other creature types, just because you want to be sure that you have the chance to, when you're generating creature tokens, have them be scarecrows. So how many counterspells do you typically run in a deck that has access to blue?
I mean, in constructed, usually all of them, but I think for EDH, you only want, especially this seems like a deck where you're proactively using your mana on your turn, so probably only a few. 2 to 3 would be my guess.
Sure. Now, how about other stuff like removal?
Yeah, you'd probably want a few hard removal spells, maybe a tutor. If you have access to blue, I think you have to play Cyclonic Rift if you're making an EDH deck. I'm pretty sure that's a rule somewhere. So yeah, I think a few removal spells, a few hard counters, a couple of tutors.
Now, since we're a 5-color deck and we're looking at the kind of removal we can run, we could be boring and run the same kind of removal that we would run in most decks. Like you have access to green, it's a no-brainer to run, something like Krosan Grip or Beast Within. But I think the fact that we have 5 colors means we could look at, the full spectrum of removal, but also some of the stuff that you have an even harder time running, which is gold stuff that's not necessarily in your colors. So if you want to be a little bit more creative with the removal you're running, you should probably look at what other token decks are doing. Now, there is another token deck that I built on Cool Stuff Inc. That gave me an idea for a few of the enchantments in this deck, and that's Arasta of the Endless Web. Now, if you look at Arasta on EDHRec, there's it as a commander and it as a card. Now, if you have it as a commander, this is just going to be green stuff. But if you have it as a card, you can see stuff it's played alongside. And Arasta is played alongside, some non-green stuff too, like Thantis the Warweaver and Thromok. And Thromok is a very good token commander because he has a Devour X. So you want to be making a lot of tokens for Thromok to eat. So Thromok is a deck that you or I typically wouldn't go into. It's pretty dirtily, it doesn't have trample. It's just a big dumb creature. But there could be some cards that we forgot about just because they haven't been printed since 2003. Something like Awakening Zone or Dragon Lair Spider. Or this card, which I found. Instead of running Krosan Grip, why not run Artifact Mutation? Destroy target artifact. It can't be regenerated. Create X/1/1 green sapling creature tokens where X artifacts convert in mana cost. If you're blowing up a 4, 5, or 6 cost artifact and you have everything set up, so you have Reaper King and Arcane Adaptation, you're blowing up 5 more permanents in addition to the Artifact Mutation. But if you don't have that set up, you don't have the Reaper King and all that kind of stuff, you're still playing a fine removal spell that'll generate you tokens. You'll get triggers on Impact Tremors and Perforos and Champion of Lambhold, and you'll have 5 creatures to do stuff with. Now, you see later on in the deck, I'm going to use our creatures to generate a lot of mana, in addition to having them just like be able to attack and block. So I think the more tokens we can get, the better. So I think if you have access to all the colors, you should consider running something like Artifact Mutation over something like Krosan Grip. So if we go over here to edit the deck, we're going to copy all the instants I said we should run to, and we're going to save changes. So you can constantly update the list by adding more cards by going over here to the pencil that says edit. So now we've added our instance. I like Arcane Denial just because I don't like having like a double blue requirement necessarily in the counter spells. But also we're running Xyrus the Writhing Storm, and there's going to be a non-zero number of times where you're going to Arcane Denial someone's spell and, get some snakes out of it. So Arcane Denial is a great counter spell to... I think when people draw cards, they feel less bad about getting their spell countered, so I think it's a good political card. It's easy to keep 1 and a blue up versus, like 2 and 2 blue or something like that. I like Arcane Denial because we're going to have to protect multiple combo pieces if we're going to have the deck run at 100%. Like you said, you want Psych Rift. I like Dovin's Veto also. And here's a new card from Commander 2020 that I really like, Fierce Guardianship. If you control your commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost and counter target non-creature spell. It's kind of a feel bad to get your creature countered in Commander. So, running negate type stuff is fine because like really that's the stuff you want to counter. You're going to feel pretty stupid if you blow your Arcane Denial on an acidic slime and then someone plays Insurrection. So countering the non-creature stuff is usually more important. And I like the fact that if you have your commander out, this is 0 mana, but also 2 and a blue is pretty easy to keep up even in a 5-color deck. I also think Enlightened Tutor is very important. I don't tend to run Enlightened Tutor because I think it's going to be a card that is too often just a second copy of a combo piece. But I think we have enough enchantments in this deck. You'll notice that we're running 18 creatures, 20 creatures and 8 instants so far. So we're going to have a lot more artifacts and enchantments than a normal deck. And Enlightened Tutor is actually a toolbox card in this deck. So I'm a big fan of running that. So we've got a couple counter spells. We've got Psych Rift. We've got Swords to Plowshares, an Artifact Mutation. It's not as much removal as you necessarily always want, but I think we're focused on blowing up their permanents with our commander. So we got a bit of a different focus there. So like removal is not as necessary as getting our combo set up. Now, I think if you're a 5-color deck, obviously you're gonna want to have access to lands early. So I think you're gonna agree with the sorceries. I think you should play in the deck. I think you want Cultivate, Farseek, and Kadama's Reach.
Yeah, I think those are all great. I think they're pretty much staples in a green EDH deck that's looking for lands. I don't think I've ever built a green EDH deck that didn't have all 3 of those in them.
Uh-huh. And if you go over to stats in the upper right-hand corner over here, it's going to tell us the extent to which the deck is green. We've got 22 blue spells right now and 10 green, so it's very blue and green heavy currently. I don't expect that to change. This is a token deck. You're going to have some green cards in it. And this is a combo deck, so you're going to have some blue cards in it. So, if you have access to green, and we're probably going to go a little bit rich on our number of basic islands and basic forests, why not run all 3 of these? Now, Quasi Duplicate is a spell that creates a copy of a creature and has Jumpstart. So for 1 card, you're going to get 2 potential Reaper King triggers, which I think is cool. And Writer Replication is just an insanely explosive spell where if you kick it and target Reaper King, you're going to get a ton of triggers. Because, 5 new tokens will come into play, but they will come into play as Reaper Kings and all see each other. So that's nuts. 8 instants and 5 sorceries is a little lighter than a lot of people say to run, but they run stuff like Brainstorm, and I think those are fine cards, but I think I would just rather be doing stuff than like trying to find stuff, you know? I think if all your deck is good stuff, then you don't have to find something specific because you're just going to draw a good card and play it. So I think for artifacts, it's it's going to be a good mix of just trying to get our colors, but also do some combo-y stuff. So again, you can just paste your whole list and save changes, and it'll just automatically update the list for you. Arcane Signet, Chromatic Lantern, Commander Sphere, Felwar Stone, Soul Ring. Those are the mana artifacts that you want to run. And here's a interesting one. I decided to run Mana Geode in this spot. Now, this could be Manalith, this could be Darksteel Ingot, this could be that 5/5 creature you have to crew or whatever. It could be a lot of some Caravan. I don't even know. See, no one plays that card. I don't even know what it's called. But I thought Mana Geode would be good for this deck because it scries when it comes into play. You can do anything you want in this spot, but that was the card I picked. Now, outside of our mana rocks, we still want to have some utility stuff. I think you want Phyrexian Altar. Normally this would be Ashnod's Altar, but I think you want Phyrexian Altar in a 5-color deck. If you're having trouble with your colors, this will get you out of that jam. And you're just sacrificing like a Saproling or something expendable. So I think Phyrexian Altar is fine. Speaking of sacrificing expendable stuff, Skull Clamp is going to do a ton of work in this deck. If you're trying to find combo pieces, Skull Clamp is going to find them. And if you're making a ton of tokens, say you blow up a 6-mana artifact with your artifact mutation, all of a sudden you can use a Phyrexian Altar to equip to a token, draw 2 cards, sack another one to get the mana to equip it. All of a sudden you're really digging through your deck with just a bunch of expendable dorks. I'm running Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots just because if you get your commander, you would really like it to stick. And I think Helm of the Host is one of the most important cards in the deck. Because since we're not going very, very hard at make Reaper King copies, Helm of the Host is a card you absolutely need. There are other ways to make non-legendary copies of creatures. The Brutaclad EDH deck. Actually, I think it's a Saheeli EDH deck. The Precon from 2 years ago has some good ways to do that. But I think the easiest way to do it is just smack a Helm of the Host on there. And once you do that, anytime you're making copies of something, you can make a copy of a non-legendary copy of Reaper King. So then every time you play a Scarecrow or something like that, you're getting a ton of triggers. So Brutaclad can make all of your tokens into copies of Reaper King. So if you do get Helm of the Host and Brutaclad, it gets really messy really fast, and it's a lot of fun. So as far as artifacts go, pretty simple. You just want your mana dorks. Since this is a token deck, our enchantments are going to do most of our heavy lifting. Now, we talked about this a little bit before, and you said you liked a lot of the ideas I had vis-a-vis running enchantments to make a token strategy better. So I kind of went nuts here. We have 19 enchantments, which is a lot. Although 2 of them are creatures. You have Perforos here, and then you have your Dryad. Yeah. And then Storm the Vault's counting itself as a land, which I think that's goofy, but
it's adorable.
I'm a real land, you guys.
It turns into one eventually, right?
Yeah. It's a land the same way Rudy played for Notre Dame. Like someday a little bit, maybe. So right off the bat, we have our combo pieces. Arcane Adaptation, Conspiracy, Xenographed. These are all cards that are going to turn our tokens of all kinds into Scarecrows. And if we have the Reaper King out, we're just going to do dumb stuff. You got Assemble the Legion, which puts a ton of soldiers into play until it puts a ton of Scarecrows into play. And then it's, lethal. I like Assemble the Legion in a deck with Doubling Season because you double the number of counters you put on Assemble the Legion every upkeep, and then you double the number of creatures coming off of it. So it's like, oh, I'll put 1 counter on it, which actually becomes 2, which gives me 2 creatures, which actually becomes 4. So like the first turn you have Assembled Legion, you're making 4 soldiers, and it just goes nuts from there.
Yeah.
Cathars Crusade. This is a card, if you're not familiar with it, Joey, I think you'll really like. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So this is why this deck runs. Stuff like this, these enchantments are why we're even bothering to run a deck where, like, if you don't have Reaper King and Arcane Adaptation, you're just making stupid tokens. It doesn't matter what stupid token you get. You play an artifact with Master Thopterist out, and, you know, you get a token, but it's all of a sudden, okay, you put a token on Champion of Lambholt, which makes everything harder to block. And, oh, by the way, this Thopter put a counter on all my other Thopters that I got before. Now they're bigger, and they're harder to block. So it doesn't really matter what the tokens are, because the stuff helps all token strategies versus, okay, I'm playing a Scarecrow. I hope my commander's still alive when I play the Scarecrow. Cryptolith, I think, is one of the best cards in a token deck. Creatures you control have add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This could easily be also an Earthcraft, but that's like a $60 card, so you don't necessarily want that. And there is a card called Sentinel Hierophants from Urza's Saga. If you wanted to jam another creature in the creature spot, that imbues all your creatures with the ability to tap for a mana. So Cryptolith is going to do a ton of work. It's going to make your tokens basically able to dump your hand. We want Doubling Season, obviously. Guardian Project. You have 20 non-token creatures. That's plenty for triggering Guardian Project. Impact Tremors, it's just like another Perf Roast, basically. For those turns where you assemble the legions going nuts, you're just going to dome the whole table. Mechanized Production's a win condition. You can slap it on a Pillypal, and all of a sudden, you know, something that's kind of a dirtly creature, you know, is triggering every turn. Now, if you're running a ton of tokens, when you're not tapping them to Cryptolith, I like tapping them to opposition. If you like this, you could easily add a Glare of Subdual that doesn't tap lands, but it can tap blockers. You've got Parallel Lives in addition to your Doubling Season. Perforos we talked about. What deck could be complete without Rhystic Study? I like Smothering Tithe. And Sterling Grove does a lot of work in this deck. I don't love tutors. I like tutors, but I don't love tutors. But I think with 20 enchantments in the deck, 21 enchantments in the deck, this is a true toolbox card. And if you already have the stuff you want, it's going to protect your stuff. So Sterling Grove does 2 different things in the deck. It can be a tutor when you need it to be, and it can be like 75% of the way to Greater Oromancy, you know. So I like Sterling Grove a lot. Thopter Spy Network, that's a flex spot. That's just a card I slapped in there. You can easily replace it with something else, or just take it out to add another instant or sorcery as you play the deck and figure out how things are working for you. But you do get a Thopter every turn, and whenever you deal them damage with an artifact creature, you draw a card, and it's only 1 per player, so you might want to spread out and attack everybody so you can draw 3 cards. So that seems a lot better. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. Every time I say something rulesy, everyone's like, well, actually, and I'm just like, okay. I was just going to take this deck to the LJS, and then I would try to do a thing, and then somebody at the table would be like, well, actually, and I'd be like, all right. So I like playing paper EDH because people teach me the rules. Like, I just make the content. I don't understand the content. So Thopter Spy Network could easily be something else, but I kind of like it in that spot. It draws you cards. And you'll make a fair number of Thopters in this deck between Hangerback Walker, Master Thopterist, and Sharding Sphinx, which just does a ton of work in this deck. Whenever an artifact creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you can create a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So Thopters beget Thopters. You can use them to attack. You can use them to make mana with Cryptolith. You can sack them to an altar. You can sack them to a Skull Clamp. The tokens don't have to be a certain creature type. That's what makes this deck work. Now, I'm pretty lazy when it comes to mana bases. You know, I put a lot of thought into the deck so far.
Yeah.
But I'm very, very lazy when it comes to mana bases. I typically just go to the Reaper King page, click average deck, and it brings up a list of the average deck, and then I go copy, paste. But for this particular deck, we talked about this a little bit. You don't mind running the Tri-Lands, which is fine. But I think since we have kind of an artifact sub-theme, I'm going to click the artifact theme and then click average deck. And what that's going to do is going to bring up the average list for an artifact-heavy theme. And if you'll notice, if eagle-eyed observers will notice that this list of lands is different than the one from the page before when it was just the general Reaper King deck. You have Ancient Den, and you have Great Furnace and Inventor's Fair, you know. So Tree of Tales, Vault of Whispers, and you're going to want to adjust your basics. This is 8 islands and 2 forests. I think we're going to want to run a few more forests than that, because, you know, we want to get that turn 2 Farseek or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think Path of Ancestry is actually fine in this deck, because like it's just a kind of clunky command tower, except when you start getting the creature you named and start scrying a little bit. So I think there's no downside to Path of Ancestry. People run Temple of the False God, and then they talk about how Path of Ancestry and like isn't great in a deck that's not specifically tribal, and it's kind of like, well, you run a card that makes you mulligan, so we're not running Temple of the False God here. But you said you were fine with the Tri-Lands.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you draw 3 Tri-Lands and you can't play a turn 1 Soul Ring, and it's whatever. That happens so infrequently. I like Reflecting Pool. I like Cascading Cataracts in a deck like this. I like Command Tower. I like Exotic Orchard. And I like the fact that you have Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and I like the fact that you have Dryad of the Elysian Grove and Chromatic Lantern. So, you know, at that point, you're just like, I tap the number of lands I have and not the specific ones. So,
yeah. Makes it way easier for someone like me.
Yep. So if you wanted to, you could seriously just highlight this and build that mana base and then adjust it on the fly. You're like, well, I don't need Terramorphic Expanse because I got a big boy job and I can go buy myself a fetch land. Or, you know, Tree of Tales is fine, but Vault of Whispers is terrible. Or why am I running Temple of the False God? It's made me mulligan more hands than Serum Powder. So for the final finishing touch, we're going to go in here. We're just going to paste the mana base I came up with. We're at 98 cards, so since we have one more spot, Joey, I'll let you decide what card goes in the 99th spot before we smack our commander in there. Is there anything that you think is missing in this deck? Anything sort of utilitarian that can cover a lot of bases?
Well, we're a token creating deck, so we want to put tokens into play. And I think this deck needs a Planeswalker, and I think there's only one Planeswalker that makes multiple tokens that we really want in this deck. Can you guess which Planeswalker it is?
Well, there's a lot that make tokens, but I think there's only one that can act as sort of removal also. So if it were up to me, I would probably run Elspeth Sun's Champion.
That's exactly who I was thinking.
So again, we go over here to add the stuff manually, select Elspeth Sun's Champion, click on the green plus sign, and it'll add it to the deck. We're at 99 cards. The deck list is ready to go. Now, since I built in sandbox mode, there are a few ways to save this, but I can't save it to my account. So if I did want to do that, I would just go back to the Archidekt front page. Oh no, unsaved changes. And I would say new deck. I would name the deck, format it, and paste it. And once it's done, we give it a 1950s beatnik name, Reaper Madness. And there it is with the commander added and a few cards highlighted because they're not legal yet. Fierce Guardianship and Xyrus the Writhing Storm from Commander 2020. And now it's got a unique ID. So if I wanted to share this on Twitter or Facebook or throw it in an article, there's the link to the deck. So this is just the first draft of the deck, but I kind of think this is going to be strong. And I think once you tune it up, it'll be even stronger. And I also think this is going to be a lot less boring than just running I'm running all kinds of changelings sort of a deck. I think when you don't have Reaper King, you're still going to make a ton of tokens, use Cryptolith Right to generate a ton of mana, use Skull Clamp to generate a ton of cards, and just find what you're looking for.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a unique take on Reaper King. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone make a token build, and there's just a lot of cards in general from the history of EDH that are just good cards by themselves, but when you put it all together, it's going to have some great synergy. And then having those combos in the deck, I think, really helps too.
Yep, and if you want some help finding stuff like that, I think EDHRec is a very good resource, and I think Archidekt is where I want to be building my decks. So that was just me building a deck for a buddy. If you want to see more content like this, go ahead and comment that on the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and blast that bell icon and thumbs up us and thumbs up us again. No, that'll cancel out the thumbs up. Do it an odd number of times. Definitely. Or you can alternate. You could thumbs up, then thumbs down, then thumbs up, and just leave it. Do whatever you want. It's your day. We're all dealing with being quarantined in our own ways. If you want to mess around on YouTube, that's your business. Joey, where can everybody find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @deathnstuff. So it's the word death with the letter N and then stuff, all one word.
Cool. And I'm Jason E. Alt. You can find me at Jason E. Alt on Twitter. And there's a pinned post at the top of my profile that tells you everything I do around the web. I write, I podcast, and I do weird deck techs, apparently. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. And if you have a deck you'd like me to help you build, let me know.